Hello and welcome again to our humble channel. I have a game I want to show us today. This game was played February 15, 2025. This was a game played between Dr. Apollos, we all know him, the great doctor, who is one of the main sponsors, if not the sponsors of the Naphtali tournament that happens in Port Harcourt on a yearly basis. And he's playing against none other than the great double knight father, Obele Koko, who is a renowned, player in that part of Nigeria. He's a pretty good player, both in blitz and classical. I mean, he's had his own shares of wins in a number of tournaments. So this is a game that was played earlier on today. Interestingly, it was a flank opening, and some things about flank opening is sometimes you really don't know what to do against them. Your opponent is playing is not really so keen about throwing all the pieces to control the central squares, but he's just trying to get his pieces on some good squares and see what happens. All right, so let us see how this game went. Like I said, this is a game that was played. It was a close tournament, by the way. So Dr. Apollos was on the white side. So let us get right into it. The game started with the move d4. We have knight f6, b3. Very unusual setup. One thing about chess is you could pretty much play anything. Yes, you could pretty much play anything as long as you can make it work. So right now, d4 followed by b3, even though it's a rare opening. But the thing is, if white can make it work, I mean, hey, why not? And one thing such openings tend to do is confuse the person with the black pieces. Normally, the person with the black pieces would just wants to throw his pawns, control as much squares in the center, get the pieces on very active squares, and then just see how it goes. So the move b3 is played, g6. Now, this is interesting because white is employing a flank opening. What's a flank opening? A flank opening is a situation whereby you fianchetto your bishop, most likely, either on the b2 square or the g2 square. Now, black in return is coming head on against this flank opening with his own flank opening. So, well, let us see whose flank opening is really going to come out ahead in this game. So, after the move b3, g6 is played. So, we have bishop to b2, we have bishop to g7. This position has actually been reached several times. One of the main there are some of the main players, some of the top grandmasters in the world. I know Mark Medarov played this line against Dinglering sometimes in 2017. And I know this line is also a line that has been used by Jobava against Valeo Pons of Spain in 2016. So Bishop G7 is played, and knight goes to F3, castles. So black's pretty much employing the King's Indian defense setup against this flank opening, which I'm not so sure about the name. We're just going to call it an Indian defense in Indian opening. So after the move castles, white plays e3. White is being very flexible with how he's going about his opening. Another possibility here is to play g3 and go for a double fianchetto, right? But here white says, you know what? I'm going to move my pawn to e3. I think I want to develop my bishop either on e2 or c4. Now, normally d3 is not the best square for whenever you're playing against a fianchetto king side, because the pawns here are not really going to give you a lot of things to do along this diagonal. Most of the cases, you really don't want a bishop to be on d3. c4, e2, maybe. But of course, very rare occasions here, you want to bring your bishop to d3. So e3 is played here. After e3, we have d6. So black has the perfect setup for the King's Indian defense. And this is the normal setup you want to have when you're playing the King's Indian defense. Now, one thing we also have to realize is regardless of the opening we play or the defenses we play, it's very important to play based on the position. Now, I'm also sure if this setup is really is the best way to take advantage of the slow build up of white's position. I'm not so sure about it because the King's Indian defense really relies on some kind of a counter attack, hitting the e5 square and then vacating the f5 to throw the pawns forward and just start to attack the king's position. But right now, white is so flexible. White is not even about trying to play on any part of the board. If you say, if you look closely, you will tell that white is actually trying to play in the middle part of the board. He has a very strong square on the e5. Now, in the King's Indian defense, one of the main moves played by black is the e5. Now, playing e5 in this position, you're just going to lose a pawn with absolutely no compensation because there's the bishop on b2, pawn on d4, and the knight on f3. So the game continues with the move bishop to d3. I just said earlier on, like bishop d3 is not the best move you want to make in this position. Why? Because you're really not going to get anything from the setup. Now, assuming we don't have a pawn on f7, or we don't have a pawn on h7, then that's a possibility. Why? Because now you can just throw your pawns all the way down to weaken the only pawn left here, and so that there could be an easy access to this king. So with the pawns intact, bishop d3 is not such the best response to the setup. I would have preferred a move like bishop to e2. Yeah, not even bishop c5. I think bishop e2 is a better move. I would prefer to have a pawn on c4. So bishop d3 is played, knight to c6. Still, black is not really threatening anything. Black's pretty much just trying to get his pieces to the best square as possible. So white castles. Now, in this situation, are there any options for white? H3 is possible. Why H3? You want to take away the best square for this bishop. Now, A3 is also possible. Why to restrict the knight from jumping to attack this bishop on D3. Actually, you should encourage the knight to attack the bishop because the bishop just rightly come back to where it's supposed to be. So Cassius has played rook to e8. Now, is it threatening to play e5? Let's see. So we have 1, 2, 3 on e5, and we have 1, 2, 3. Is it threatening to play e5? Yeah, that's a possibility. So knight bd2. White says, I'm just going to keep developing my pieces, trying to get my pieces on the best squares possible. And then black strikes with the move e5. Like I said earlier, in the King's Indian defense, e5 is a very, very important move for the black pieces because after the e5, you kind of have a pawn chain. And with the pawn chain, you actually tend to play towards this part of the board. Vacating the f5 square, pushing the pawn forward, and then just try to throw your pieces. But right now, it's not going to be such an ideal situation for black because you don't have a lot of pieces on the king's side. Now, if this knight was somewhere around the king's position, probably that would be a good idea. So e5 is played, captures on e5, captures back. Now, looking at this position, I think white looks really flexible. Of course, black is not looking bad either. And one thing black don't want to do in this position is get rid of this bishop because if you lose this bishop, your king is going to be pretty much exposed to a lot of attacks on the dark square. So after the move captures back, we have bishop to b5. Now, I think I like knight e4 here. Knight e4 because after take back, you're threatening bishop. Yeah, it's possible. Bishop takes is possible. And white still looks pretty good in this position, but I wouldn't say white has any kind of advantage. So bishop to b5 is played. It's just threatening to win a pawn. Take, knight takes pawn. Or even maybe, yeah, knight takes pawn, why not? So that the other knight goes to f3. So it says e5. Sorry, it says e4, forcing the knight to a not so good square. So it plays knight to d4. It says, I'm just going to put pressure on your knight on c6. Now, you don't want to take here because, of course, you're going to lose your exchange. So after the move knight to d4, black plays bishop to d7. Not the best move. A better move in this situation would have been to pretty much bring the queen to d5 is a possibility. I don't know what that's going to get really. Then a6. I really don't think I like the move a6. So in this position, bishop d7 is played. And this is actually the most logical move. You want to break the pin, and apart from breaking the pin, you want to have another protection to the knight on c6. So knight takes c6, b takes c6, bishop goes back to e2. So what has white gained with the capture on c6? He's been able to double the black's pawn, which is going to be a big liability for black when they get to the endgame. They still both have their bishops, which can be very, very good based on the position being very open, even though black has his bishop as well. Even though the engine says this is even, I would really take white in this position because if you pretty much look at it, white has a very slight edge just because, of course, um, I mean, most importantly, like white doesn't have any double pawns, nor does it have any isolated pawns. We can't say the same thing for the black pieces. So bishop goes to e2. Very interesting move by Dr. Apollos. So queen to e7. Now, what's the queen to e7? What's the queen e7 threatening? I'm not so sure about this queen having any threat, but I know rook d2 is going to be a very good move for the black pieces. Why you want to centralize your pieces? Now, knight c4 is played in this position. Very good move. With the knight on c4, there's a possibility of bishop to a3, putting pressure on this queen. And also, there's always a possibility of queen to d2, bringing the queen to a5. Now, why am I saying all these things? In anytime you have a position, you want to try and understand what you're expected to do based on the position. In this position, I really like the white pieces, like I said, because they're all looking good and looking after each other. Now, you don't have to worry about anything concerning the king because the black pieces doesn't really have enough to throw at this king right now to cause any kind of distraction. So queen to e7 is played. We have knight to c4, rook to d8. Of course, that move is going to come at some point in time. Queen to e1. I like the move queen to e1. What are the other possibilities here? There's also rook to c1. Um, there's also queen to d2. But I really like queen to e1. On principles, whenever there's a pin, just get out of the pin. So queen to e2 is played. Now queen goes to c5. That's a good move. That's a good move. Why do I say it's a good move? Of course, I was planning to bring the queen to a5, putting pressure, start to hit the weak pawns here. So queen goes to c5. After queen to c5, bishop to d4, gains a tempo on the queen, puts pressure on the pawn on a7. Now, if this pawn on a7 falls, we have an outside pass pawn, which is going to be very, very dangerous. So after the move bishop to d4, queen goes to g5, threatening the bishop goes to h3, over make threat on g2. Now, if you have to force the pawn on g2 to move, you lose an exchange. I think the next move the great doctor played here is not a move I would really advise, although the engine said it was the second best move. I would have probably just stepped aside king h1. Why? Try not to move any pawns whenever you're being attacked, because once you move those pawns cannot move backwards. So here, another possibility that I thought about is I'm just going to go ahead and grab this pawn. So if it comes to h3, I can just give up an exchange, and then I have a very dangerous pass pawn here. Now, if you look at the rooks are really not doing a whole lot. Yes, you have major pieces, but you really don't have the fast to use them. So in this position, the two bishops coupled with the knight are pretty much going to dominate this position. But anyway, if it's something you don't have to do, then what? Just step aside, king h1. But in this position, f4 was actually played by the doctor. After f4 captures, rook captures back. Now, why I was not such a fan of f4 is now think about this. What exactly did White achieve with the move f4? I think White just ended up giving himself an isolated pawn on e3. This situations are not necessary at all. Now with the pawn on e3, you're going to have to defend the pawn, even though you really can't go grabbing the pawn right now. Now you have a weakness you have to defend. So here, rook goes to e6. Not the best move. And I think it's very important for black to start to hit on white's position. Bishop f5 is a good move. One of the ideas behind bishop f5 is you're putting pressure on the pawn on c2, and you're making sure your two rooks are open and actually are looking down the board. So rook to e6 is played here. Now, what is the move threatening? I wouldn't really say it's threatening anything more, probably much putting some more protection on the knights on f6. After rook to e6, h4. Wow, the doctor is just throwing everything there. Now, what's the point of h4? Probably this queen doesn't really have a lot of squares to move. So let us see. The queen doesn't have the square f5. Well, the queen can go to d5. The queen can go to c4, but going to c4 might be not such a good move because we always have a discover that you have to be worried about. I think the h4 move is pretty much trying to exploit the fact this queen is not looking good. Why am I talking about the h4 move? Number one, you never want to move the pawn in front of your king. Yeah, I mean, it's going to cause a weakness. And if you don't get anything out of moving the pawn, that's just a permanent weakness. And I think the move h4 is the idea to just make some life difficult for the queen on g5. After the move queen h4, the queen goes to d5. Now, what is the queen threatening? Nothing really. No threat at all yet. But now there's a problem here. The queen is on the d5, and we have a rook on a1 that is yet to move. Now, in a game of chess, this is one thing I tell my students. If you don't know what to do, ask yourself, what are the pieces you are yet to move? Now, if we look on the board, there is only one piece that is left to be moved in this position, and that's the rook on a1. So what do? We centralize the rook. What do we mean by centralizing the rooks? Put the rooks on the e file and on the d file. Why the e and the d file? Because those two files is where you have the center squares, the e4, d4, and the e5 and the d5. So rook to d1. What is the threat? Bishop takes f6, winning the piece. So the queen has to move again. So the queen goes to the square e4. Now, I really don't know why Obele Coco is trying to just, I don't know if he's trying to just make this, make it not such a good, not too, I don't know. But what's the point of the move rook to queen to d to e4? Okay, you're attacking the pawn on c2. This is not a point you really want to grab. So after the move queen to e4, rook f4 was played. Rook f4 was played. Now, this queen doesn't seem to have any squares to go to. Now, queen takes c2 is a possibility, but after rook to d2, that queen is just trapped. You have nowhere to move to. Yeah. And this is what I'm talking about. If you take a move here, you don't have any squares to move to. So you have to use your head on this, and then you're just losing. So what are the other possibilities? Well, um, the other possibility is just to take the rook. And then after pawn takes, you just down a queen for not a whole lot of things you can show for that. And then there's rook takes e2 followed by queen take. Then there's bishop to g4, pinning the queen to the rook. In this position, white decides to go for a double attack, which makes a lot of sense. When you can, when you attacked and there's no way you want to save yourself right away, you go for counter attack. So bishop queen goes to the square, e7 double attacking the rook and the knight. Now, of course, rook d7 makes a lot of sense, gaining the tempo back. Now, in this position, the great doctor decides to sacrifice his queen by the move bishop takes f6. Very good move. Now, if you take the queen, he has an in-between move check. If bishop goes back, bishop takes here, and black is just crushed. So instead, after the move, um, rook d7, bishop takes f6, it takes rook d1 check. The king goes to h2. Queen bishop goes to f8. That's not really going to help black. Black's pieces are so, I mean, they are so, the communication between them are not looking good at all. At least if you have your pieces, together, you might say, you might get something out of it. But they are so discommunicated. I don't know if that's a word, but Queen e7 was played. And I started to start grabbing some pawns, grab as many pawns as possible. And now we have just three pieces against three. This is not something black wants to play. So after taking the pawn on c7, rook goes to c2 is like, I'm about to start grabbing my own pawns. Now, if I have the white pieces right here, I'll just pawn in on this weak square on f7. Because if I can get a knight to e5, queen takes f7 check, is going to be made in one. So what does white do here? Knight e5. Not just attacking the weak pawn on f7, also attacking the weak bishop on f on g4. Bishop e6 stops the threat. Another pawn bites the dust. Queen takes c6. h5. Now, what's the point of h5? Of course, the king has to create some places, some opportunities, so that the king can breathe. Now, here comes knight takes g6. At this point, you're just pretty much playing like a GM because, hey, your opponent has given you a lot of possibilities. Hey, why not use it? So knight takes g6 is played. Bishop goes to um, h6, threatening really nothing. Of course, queen check comes in the game. King goes to h7. We have a knight check. Bishop captures. Queen captures back. We have king to g6. Now, this king has turned into a running man. But hey, you know what? I don't think this king can run for long, especially when you have the queen and the bishop controlling the dark squares, and you have some pawns here that are controlling the light squares. So let us see what happens. Queen g7 is played. We have king to f5. We have queen to g5. We have king to e4. And after the move queen e5, it is checkmate. Why? The queen puts a check on the king. The dark squares are controlled, like I said earlier. The pawns are controlling the white squares, and it is game over. I don't know if in this game, um Obele Koko underestimated his opponent, but I think he should know better. The doctor is not somebody you want to play around with. You better bring your A game if you play the doctor. So this was an interesting flank opening. So yeah, my take on this is I don't think Black was really ready for the things White was trying to throw at him. But I like the fact the way White was able to double the pawns on the C pawn, and they just tried to exploit the pawn. It didn't even go out to exploit the pawn. There was actually more of a piece play for White. So that's it for now, people, and I will see you all soon. Take care. God bless and bye for now.